and 19th century American sculpture, painting, cemetery design, and cemetery sculpture, with a current focus on Italian sculpture and American rural or garden cemeteries. Beth is currently the sole editor of Markers, the annual journal of the Association for Gravestone Studies, and the only peer-reviewed academic journal on cemeteries and grave markers. Also with us tonight is Diane Turnshek. Diane is a lecturer in the Department of Physics at Carnegie Mellon University and an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Pittsburgh. She runs the Astronomy Public Lecture Series at Allegheny Observatory and coordinates astronomy outreach in Pittsburgh through pittsburghconstellation.com. Her love of both astronomy and science fiction led her to crew the Mars Desert Research Station, where she turned her attention to dark sky advocacy and earned an International Dark Sky Defender Award. She gave a light pollution TEDx Pittsburgh talk, curated a series of space art galleries, and founded the local chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. In 2019, she edited the genre anthology Triangulation, Dark Skies, with 21 Starry Night short stories. She is planning a 2.5-day international union-focused meeting on light pollution in Busan, South Korea for 2022. And Joel Tarr. Joel studies the environmental histories of cities and the history and impact of their technological systems. He is particularly interested in using history to understand contemporary problems. In 1992, Carnegie Mellon University awarded him the Robert Doherty Prize for Contributions to Excellence in Education, and in 2003, he was elected a university professor. In 2008, the Society for the History of Technology awarded him the highest award, the Leonardo da Vinci Medal, for his outstanding contribution to the history of technology. He received the 2015 Distinguished Service Award from the American Society for Environmental History. His co-authored book, The Horse and the City, Living Machines in the 19th Century, was awarded honorable mention for the Lewis Mumford Prize of the Society for City and Regional Planning History. He is co-editor with Martin V. Malosi of the University of Pittsburgh series, The History of the Urban Environment. And Joel has served on National Research Council committees dealing with issues of urban infrastructure, public transit, water pollution, and the human dimensions of global change. We are thrilled to have all of you with us. We couldn't be happier and prouder. And we're going to get started with the presentation, and I will let Joel take us away. Oh, you're on mute, Joel.
There we go. I've been struggling with Zoom all day. My video is started. Am I in good shape? Okay.
We'll just pull up your PowerPoint. Give me 1 second here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's on the screen.
Okay. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Very generous introduction, I must say. Those of you who are familiar with the work that I've done on cities, and particularly in Pittsburgh, know that I often really have not been concerned with issues like light, sometimes more with darkness in terms of pollution, but not with light. And oftentimes I've been concerned with underground infrastructure. But I wanted to start off this presentation by quoting from No Star Nights, a wonderful children's book by Anna Egan Smucker, that was brought to my attention by my colleague Diana. And I'm going to read what she has to say because I think it embodies so well aspects of, well, we couldn't see the stars in the nighttime sky because the furnaces of the mill turned the darkness into a red glow. But we would lie on the hill and look up at the sky anyway and wait for a bright orange light that seemed to breathe in and out to spread across it. And we would know that the golden spark spitting steel was being poured out of giant buckets into molds to cool. Then we would look down on a train, pulling cars mounted with giant thimbles rocking back and forth. They were filled with fiery, hot, molten slag that in the night glowed orange. And when they were dumped, the sky lit up again. So there we have, next slide, please. Amanda. Next slide there. The light in Pittsburgh, the light provided by the mills, it seems to me, was no more effectively presented than it was by artists such as Henry Aaron Gorson. And by the way, Gorson's paintings adorn the hallways of the Duquesne Club. Marvelous paintings. This is the Pittsburgh mills at night, and make clear the way in which the fiery light from the making of steel lit up on the nighttime sky. Next slide, please. Next, Amanda. Again, this is obviously a photograph. This is not a painting, but it gives you, in essence, the same kind of imagery of the power of the light and energy provided by the mills. And of course, you can still see some of that because we still have some mills in the Pittsburgh region. And I've noticed they've been frequently violating the air pollution control rules recently. But we have mills, we have 3 basic mills still in the region. And I don't think you can see scenes like this anymore, but they were extremely dramatic. Now, I came to Pittsburgh in 1967, and these were not unusual scenes that you would see around the city. Next, Amanda. Next. Now, in the quote that I read, they talk about the dumping of slag. And slag is a byproduct waste that's produced when you make steel. And for each ton of steel, you produce about 2/3 of a ton of slag. Is red hot material that had to be dumped somewhere. And as you heard in the quote, was dumped on hills or valleys where they could be seen. This is dumping that's taking place at Brown's dump over on the south side, where there was the Century 3 Mall was. And of course, everybody from this east end of Pittsburgh is familiar with 9 Mile Run and the dumping that took place there for over 50 years of red hot slag, as we see in this picture, creating, by the way, a huge artificial mountain where there had been none before. Next slide, please. I looked hard for a picture, a photograph of Pittsburgh slag being dumped, a color photograph. I couldn't find one, but I did find a color photograph of slag being dumped in a mill outside this country. And I thought it very well visualized for you what it meant in terms of light and power to have the slag dumped. Joining Carnegie Mellon University, I was told that it was a pretty customary thing for guys to take their dates on a Saturday night to watch slag dumping, the red hot slag dumping taking place either at 9 Mile Run or at Century, what is now, Brown's dump. Next page. Now, I think we have to realize that over time, there have been a series of different ways in which light has been provided to the city, aside from the industrial lights, the light produced by industrial activities. And different kinds of lights had different kinds of illuminating power, of course. It's measured by lumens. And here we see a chart that shows you how candles are the first to be used, followed by whale oil, which came from the blubber of whales and nearly destroyed almost eliminated the species of certain kinds of whales because of the quest for whale oil to use in lighting. Then the development of manufactured gas, as known in Great Britain as town gas, or gas made from coal, which was extensively done in the United States also, and in the city of Pittsburgh. I'll talk a bit more about it in a second. Then followed by kerosene, a byproduct of the making of the distilling of petroleum, and finally by electricity. So you can see the way in which the amount of artificially produced light increases over time with these different sources. Next slide. This is a slide, a picture I found of a whale oil lamp. It's taken in actually in and I think it was in Newport, Rhode Island, as a matter of fact, where there's a great, in a lot of places in New England, you find different kinds of lighting apparatus in different antique shops. And so this whale oil was very common. And in 1816, the city of Pittsburgh had a number of whale oil lamps scattered around its downtown. I said a number, I shouldn't exaggerate. The whale oil produced some light, but it was limited light, as you might expect. Next slide. Now, I mentioned already the development of manufactured gas or coal gas, made primarily from bituminous coal. And the first gas street lamp in America was built in Baltimore in 1816. And for some reason I've never been able to figure out, it wasn't until 1837 that Pittsburgh began to produce gas from coal, because we had so much coal, of course, and we had the installation of manufactured gas lights in the city, but primarily in the more well-to-do areas, the more affluent areas, and also in retail areas, but they were not really present at all in outlying areas or poor areas of the city because it was expensive. They're expensive infrastructure in terms of their fuel and also the necessity to lay pipes to distribute the gas after it's manufactured. Next slide. Now, this is a quote from the Pittsburgh Gazette from 1837, when they had begun to, they laid, I don't know how many lights in total they put out, but they had the authorization of laying 6,000 feet of gas pipes. And they were laid in a triangle that really started at the point and extended throughout the downtown Pittsburgh, up until probably Grants Hill, I would think. And the quote, of course, says, although the evening was dull and gloomy, that portion of the city within the limits of the gas pipe laid down was well lighted. And many of our citizens traversed the streets, gratified with a great improvement in addition to our comfort. That's after the whale oil lamps. The gas lights burned certainly with as much purity and brilliancy as any that we have ever seen. 1837. Next slide. And just like the whale oil lamps had to be serviced by a lamplighter, so did the manufactured gas lamps have to be serviced by a lamplighter, who in many cases had the responsibility of lighting the lamps at dusk, and then in many cases turning them off in the morning. In some cities, actually, they had the police take on that responsibility. But it was not uncommon to find many lamplighters in the city of Pittsburgh. I found lamplighters in the city directors of Pittsburgh as late as 1921. Next slide. Now, so I was particularly interested not necessarily in the light provided by the manufactured gas lamps as much as the pollution that they created, because the manufacturing of that gas did produce a very toxic pollution stream that polluted a number of sites where the plants were located, particularly the one where the Pittsburgh Technology Park exists today. That's where the largest gaslight manufacturing plant existed. Well, when doing work on that, I ran across a a report of the Pittsburgh City of Public Works. And the report was written by Edward Bigelow, very famous for being the father of Pittsburgh parks, big statue in Shenley Park, of course. And it's very unusual to find published reports from that department. This is the so-called annual reports, but they're not annual. But at any rate, I found this report, and this is what it said. It said in 1895, Pittsburgh had approximately 6,000 street lamps, divided almost evenly between gasoline and electric arc lamps. And Bigelow boasted in 1895 that Pittsburgh had transformed itself in a decade from being among the darkest to being one of the very best lighted cities in the world, end of quote. So I said to myself, okay, I know what arc lamps are, and Miss George Westinghouse had a lot to do with them, but what is a gasoline street lamp? I never heard of it. And questing around to my fellows in the history, people who worked in the history of energy, nobody had ever heard of them. So I began investigating what gasoline street lamps were and why Pittsburgh had so many of them, had over 3,000 of them, and found that they were also located in a number of other cities, but primarily in the outlying areas of the cities, in the parks, and in the areas where the cost of installing manufactured gas was expensive, was too high. And therefore these, I call them off-grid lamps, just like the whale oil lamps, off-grid, not connected to a grid, could be located. Next slide. Next. Now the company that was most responsible for installing, not only in Pittsburgh, but in hundreds of cities throughout the United States, these gasoline street lamps, was the Pennsylvania Globe Gas Light Company, which is really formed by an alliance between distillers in Pittsburgh and people, some very wealthy infrastructure people from the city of Philadelphia. And they installed these gasoline street lights throughout the United States, as I said. And this is a cover from one of their advertising brochures that I found. And maybe, perhaps you can notice the, I don't have a pointer here, but you can see the small tank that's on top of the light itself, into which the gasoline would be applied. And again, in order to operate these lamps, you had to have a lamp lighter, but they were not connected to a grid, and therefore they were far cheaper to install than the manufactured gas lamps that had to have a pipe system. But not only that, but they also used gasoline and also naphtha, which were byproducts of the distilling of petroleum for kerosene. They used a cheap byproduct that was much cheaper to use than manufacturing manufactured gas. So here we have a technology that has two great attributes. One, it uses a very inexpensive byproduct. And the second thing, the other attribute, is it's cheaper to install and it's not necessarily connected to a grid. And most of us are familiar with the problems that Texas has had in the last few weeks with their electrical grid. Next slide. When I found this slide, this photograph, I think it's an amazing photograph. It's a photograph taken by the Pittsburgh city photographer about 1900 of an intersection between Lenore Street I just blanked out on the name of it, but it's an intersection in the east end of Pittsburgh. And you get a wonderful picture of that, an actual installation of a gasoline street lamp there. You can see the tank on the bottom of it. And then, of course, a small child at the bottom there. So I think it's a very revealing picture about the building of Pittsburgh infrastructure. Next slide. Next, please. Yeah. Now, what about the arc lamps, though? The heat of the gasoline street lamps, of course. And actually, that both the gasoline street lamps and the arc lamp had driven out of Pittsburgh in the late 19th century the use of manufactured gas lighting for a couple of decades. The key person here was George Westinghouse, who installed arc lamps in Pittsburgh, which produced a very brilliant light, as you can see in this illustration. And Westinghouse, of course, was a great inventor. Really, he deserves almost as much credit as Westinghouse, not Westinghouse, I'm sorry, Edison received in his ability to really innovate in many, many ways. And these arc lamps were particularly located, I discovered, in the downtown areas and more affluent areas of Pittsburgh. And that's because they were more expensive, but also they provided more light, and therefore they made an awful lot of sense in the more frequently retail, the areas are more frequently visited for shopping and for retail things and so on. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, this is not a Pittsburgh slide, but this is known as this is a picture of what was known as a moon tower. And there were hundreds of these moon towers that were built in many Midwestern cities and towns, like Detroit, for instance, and Akron and so on. And these were towers that were 150 to 250 feet tall, at the top of which you had arc lamps. Now, arc lamps were very brilliant, and therefore it's important that you have them at a distance from sight. But also it spread light. They spread light over large areas of the city. And in many of the towns where these were installed, they boasted about they had created light out of darkness. They had created the moon again, whereas before that you couldn't see. And so these are known as moon towers. And as I said, the only city where you can still find these today is in Austin, Texas, which has preserved one of their towers. But it's really a very important episode in American lighting history. Next slide. This is another illustration of the way in which arc lamps light at a large distance above the street would provide light for a fairly large area of the city. Next slide. I have a couple of slides here of some of the street lamps that you might find. They may have been, they were not gasoline street lamps. They may have been manufactured gas lamps. They may have been street lamps, basically they were arc. Next slide, please. But increasingly over time, many of these street lamps were outfitted with what were called Welsbach mantles. And what a Welsbach mantle is something that many of you who camp out and use take a small light with you, a gas light with you, creates a brilliant light when exposed to heat. And because of the effectiveness of the Welsbach mantle in providing light, as compared with the earlier forms, they competed with the electrical industry for decades in a way that really mattered and spread throughout not only this city, but other cities. Next slide, please. Next. I found this picture to be so indicative of Pittsburgh and the way it regarded its atmosphere and its light. This is the semi-centennial celebration of the invention of Edison's incandescent lamp, 1929. And what strikes me about this is Westinghouse is much more important than Edison for Pittsburgh. And yet here they are celebrating Edison's incandescent lamp and trying to light the city up to celebrate it in that fashion. Next slide. Now, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but let me go quickly by going to another theme that's been very prevalent within Pittsburgh history. And that is Pittsburgh is a smoky city. Now, this is an 1846 etching. The artist made no attempt at all, of course, to hide the smoke coming from many, many sources. Why? Because they were proud of the smoke. It meant jobs, it meant industry. But it also meant that seeing the skies and seeing the stars was extremely difficult. Next slide, please. Next. And this is again an illustration of the vast quantities of effluents being issued by these are steel mills. This happens to be the Jones and Lockring mills. This is a post-World War II picture, by the way. Next. Picture. Next slide. Okay, so let's go back to the smoky skies theme. Smoky skies. Can we go back to the previous one first? Smoky skies, of course, meant that you could not see the skies. You could not see the stars. And these are pictures of post-World War II Pittsburgh, right after the end of the war. And I'll talk more about smoke control in a second. These are pictures that were taken at midday in downtown Pittsburgh, when the streetlights had to be turned on because of the pall of smoke that covered the downtown, particularly because of inversions, and blocked out clearly views of the sky, to say nothing about the stars. Next slide, please. Next, we can go next. Here's again another picture from that time period. Here's the closest thing I could find to a Pittsburgh moon tower would be the Gulf Tower, which was built opened in 1932, and which at the top of it, of course, has these multicolored lights to indicate weather. But as I said, Pittsburgh never had a similar kind of moon tower to other cities, such as Akron and Austin and so on. Next slide. Now, what happened to smoke? Smoke begins to disappear after World War II. Why did it begin to disappear? Partially because of the agitation of people, particularly women and women's groups, to get rid of the smoky skies and to get rid of the filth that they had to deal with in their homes and on their clothing. But the transition to cleaner skies did not occur necessarily only because of smoke control. Next slide, please. The transition that occurred, basically producing cleaner skies, less smoke-filled skies, is not only because of the Smoke Control Act, but also because of the coming into Pittsburgh of cheap natural gas from the Southwest, from two great pipelines, Big Inch and Little Inch, that were built during the Second World War to get oil into the industrial cities, but which are converted to natural gas by a group of entrepreneurs, including some people in the coal industry, by the way. So cheap natural gas comes into the city at the time when they are beginning to enforce the Smoke Control Act. And guess what? The skies clear up. We begin to see the sun. We begin to see the stars until there's another development. Next slide. And the other development, it seems to me, is the way in which it becomes difficult now to see the stars, not because of smoke pollution, but because of light pollution. We are so proud about willing to experience and suffer, if you will, exposure to open skies and our ability to see the stars. Okay, thank you very much for patiently listening, and we can move on.
Thank you, Joel. I wanted to mention a couple of times the internet was a bit unstable and you broke up. So if anyone has any questions or if there was anything that didn't come through, we will have some time at the end if you'd like to type a question in the chat. I know there may be a feature that's disabled just temporarily with that. We're working on that on the back end, but you can also type anything in the Q&A and I will be monitoring your questions and we'll be able to address those after the panelists are finished. So thanks for bearing with us on that. And Joel, I just wanted to mention, we did have someone comment. I don't know if you noticed when you talked about the quote from the Pittsburgh Gazette back in 1837, the date was April 8th, today's date. So lovely coincidence. And,
Thank you
for that. We have Beth up next to join us, and I will let you take it away. Thank you.
Sorry, just want to bring my slides up. Okay, I hope everybody can see the slides and hear me. Thank you, Cato and Amanda, and thanks to the Frick for inviting me to participate in this program. I had so much fun organizing this presentation, examining the history of Western art from a perspective that I had not consciously considered before. My presentation concentrates on Western painting because I had to limit it somehow, and that is primarily what I teach. The works of art date from the early 14th century to the late 19th century. Again, just set some limitations, but also because the best known paintings of the night, the best known painting of the night sky, Van Gogh's The Starry Night, was painted in 1889. I also wanted to include two artists in the Frick collection whose work dates from the 1890s. I picked one painting from each century since I have a limited amount of time, though I do dwell longer in the 19th century, which is my primary research focus, as Cato mentioned. Oh, and I hope you don't find the PowerPoint template too distracting. It's called Celestial, and when I saw it, I just had to use it. So that's, you know, again, I hope that the colors and the graphics aren't too distracting. The early years of the 14th century is what scholars refer to as the late medieval period or the proto-Renaissance. The latter term is based on the stirrings in art and literature of characteristics that would later be recognized as humanist and consistent with the Italian Renaissance of the 15th and 16th centuries, such as concentration on the individual and greater attention to the natural world, moving away from the spiritualized and stylized depictions of the Middle Ages. Artists began to study real people and their environment. The works of two masters of this period embody this change. While Duccio of Siena, who you see here, did advance depictions of human form and the landscape, this did not extend to depictions of the sky. He maintained a key characteristic of earlier medieval and Byzantine painting in this panel from his altarpiece, the Maesta. Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, I have a hard time saying that, shows Jesus and his disciples the night before his arrest, but features a sky made of gold leaf. This was common in medieval painting. All of the skies Duccio depicts in the Maesta, which is a multi-paneled altarpiece, are made from gold leaf, regardless of day or night, and this depicts night. The gold alluded to heaven, which is appropriate for an altarpiece, and was a way for the altarpiece's patrons to demonstrate wealth. A lot of gold leaf, the result of pounding real gold into tissue-thin sheets, cost a lot of money. Change would come, however, with Duccio's contemporary Giotto, who in a commission from the Scrovegni family of Padua, painted the frescoes of what is known today as the Arena Chapel, because the Scrovegni home was built into an ancient Roman arena. The color that should strike you immediately is the rich blue, described by some scholars as the color of the sky on a clear day. Blue works to visually unify the chapel, combining the narrative panels, which you see here, with the barrel vaulted night sky. Blue works, oh, just said that, blue works visually, again, to unify the separate narrative panels with the barrel vaulted ceiling, and also provides the panels, one of which you see here, with greater dimension and naturalism. Blue as a cool color falls back visually, while gold, a warm color, asserts itself flattening the composition. So Duccio's work looked much flatter than Giotto's work. Giotto was among the first Western artists to paint the sky blue. The barrel vault depicts the dome of heaven with very regularly oriented stars and portholes in the sky from which Mary, Jesus, and the saints look down on us. Yet his focus on the natural world only went so far. He used the same blue color for day and night. The panel on the right comes from the narrative of the Virgin Mary's parents. Joachim and Anna were elderly, yet did not have children. This caused Joachim to be expelled from the Jewish temple when he went to offer a lamb as a sacrifice. He therefore retired to the sheepfold, which is apparently what you do when you're humiliated in ancient Jerusalem. That night, he prays to God to be blessed with a child. That scene's not here. And that night, an angel appeared to Joachim in a dream to tell him that not only would he become a father, but he would be the parent of the Mother of God. We know it's nighttime, not only because Joachim is sleeping, but because the shepherds now have hats and hoods to protect themselves from the night air. Yet the sky remains a brilliant blue. After the deaths of Duccio and Giotto, Italy was beset with a succession of plagues, droughts, and economic turmoil. Painting regressed and the gold sky returned. In an altarpiece in the 1420s, officially into the early Renaissance, however, by Gentile da Fabriano, features both old and new visual elements. It depicts the adoration of the Magi. At the upper left, right here, the Magi cite the Star of Bethlehem, which is represented in a gold leaf sky. The painting then follows the journey of the Magi to Jerusalem and then around here to the nativity scene itself. Despite the use of gold, the extensive use of gold and the patterning in the altarpiece, which suggest an earlier time period, Gentile was also closely studying animals, as you see here, and attempting foreshortening here in the servant who attempts to remove the spurs from the youngest Magi. Also in his predella, which is this part down here, the predella is the base of an altarpiece. I think he felt a greater or was able to be more experimental because it's a secondary part of the altarpiece. And right here, he shows the nativity. This is believed to be the earliest painting of the night sky in European painting because it depicts the darkness of the night and a deep blue sky with stars, again, very regularly arrayed, and the moon. But note that the strongest source of light, of illumination, is the infant Jesus, whose glow shines on those around him and casts clear shadows. Giotto never mastered cast shadow. This is the first time in European painting that it's believed to show cast shadows. This is a much more naturalistic part of the altarpiece, again, because he could be a little bit more experimental. So we see his naturalistic, somewhat naturalistic observation of the sky and the symbolic light of Jesus, which demonstrate his careful study of how light and shadow work. As mentioned, I've always heard that this was the first European night sky in painting, but in my research for this talk, I found an earlier image of Jesus at Gethsemane from a Book of Hours created about a decade before Gentile's altarpiece in Northern Europe. A Book of Hours is a collection of prayers. The Limborch brothers' book for the Duke of Burgundy is among the most lavishly decorated book of hours with full-page illuminations. I should explain that illuminations here does not refer to light in any way. It's the word based on limner or painter, which is used to describe manuscript. They're always called manuscript illuminations, even though, again, it has nothing to do with light. The main pages in the Book of Hours represent the months. You can see here January. They generally feature the Duke of Burgundy, who we see here, enjoying leisure pastimes. Above in this half circle, we see the night sky with the symbols of the zodiac related to January and a solar chariot here. A smaller illumination, though, is the one that really caught my eye. Again, it's an image of Jesus at Gethsemane, which I hadn't seen before. I found it striking because it more successfully suggests a figure in the darkness of night, with Jesus appearing silhouette-like. The stars are much more random than we've seen before, maybe suggesting actual constellations, and we see shooting stars as well. So again, this fascinated me. The other light sources, Jesus's halo and the torches and lanterns of the disciples and soldiers, cast very limited light. So this small scale image, probably because it's small scale, has not attracted the attention of scholars, though it may actually be the first realistic image of the night sky in early Renaissance Europe. By the early 16th century, nature had been conquered by the great masters of the High Renaissance. Curiously, I discovered no images of the night sky by Leonardo, the most scientifically oriented of the three, or Michelangelo, who had little interest in landscape. Raphael, however, painted a fresco that is in many ways a celebration of his deep understanding of light and dark. Again, we can tell it's nighttime by the bright moon here behind the scudding clouds. Torches reflect on the armor of the guards sleeping when they should be guarding Peter. The brightest part of the painting, though, is the divine light that extends from an angel. The story is based on the Acts of the Apostles. Peter was arrested and jailed in Jerusalem. An angel appears and miraculously breaks his chains and then leads him past the sleeping guards. Today, the Roman Church San Pietro in Vincoli, or St. Peter in Chains, display the chains broken by the angel. It's difficult to determine which paintings of the Baroque period or 17th century actually take place at night because of the strong contrasts of light and dark that fascinated masters of the era, such as Caravaggio, Velázquez, and Rembrandt, where both scenes of night and day are dramatically lighted. So instead, I want to mention a painting that for centuries was thought to take place at night, given its nickname, The Night Watch, by Rembrandt. But the painting didn't gain this title until the 1790s, when the coatings of varnish that Rembrandt applied to protect it had darkened to the degree that it looked like a night scene. A wax resin lining was added to the back of the painting in 1851, further darkening the forms. Its actual title, you can see there, is the Militia actually it's a shortened version of the Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Bonink Koch. He is represented here with his lieutenant next to him in the act of telling his lieutenants to organize the men for a parade. Captain Koch is shown, again, directing his lieutenant. The painting has been conserved and restored multiple times since 1642. Most recently, after 1975, when a man who was mentally ill slashed it 12 times with a knife stolen from the cafeteria of the Rijksmuseum. But recently, in 2019, the largest research and restoration project in the history of the Rijksmuseum is addressing the painting once more, but in the gallery. Here it is in the gallery as it looked prior to 2019. And you can see that it's much brighter in situ. You can see a lot more of the detail in the background. This is what it looks like today. The painting and the conservators are enclosed in a glass chamber so the public can see them at work, at the restoration work and the research examination of the night watch. In the 18th century, saw the rise of Romanticism, which was not so much an art style, but a state of mind that acted as a backlash against Enlightenment thinking. Placing emphasis not on intellect, but emotion, Romantic painters created work that tapped into intense feeling, such as Fuseli's The Nightmare. The forces that so fascinated the Romanticists included the macabre, the Gothic, the dark, the erotic, and what would later be called the unconscious. Fuseli's The Nightmare is the first painting to successfully depict an intangible idea rather than an event, person, or story. Freud actually had a reproduction of the nightmare in his study. The 19th century and Romanticism also brought a new attitude towards nature, one that prioritized how landscape painting made the viewer feel. The feeling most desired was the sublime, an artistic effect productive of the strongest emotions the mind is capable of feeling. Caspar David Friedrich, a German artist's Abbey in the Oak Forest, is a painting that combines mysticism and religion with the sublime, depicting a Gothic ruin and gnarled trees silhouetted against a sky that appears to be transitioning from either day to night or night to day. I think that's a little bit unclear, while barely visible monks down here carry a coffin into a graveyard. This is also 19th century. It's Camille Pissarro's The Boulevard Montmartre at Night, 1897. As Joel discussed, nighttime changed radically with the invention of artificial light. Before this time in Paris, there was no nightlife because there was no safe way to navigate the twisting streets of the still medieval city. The new Paris, designed by Baron Haussmann at the direction of Napoleon III, knocked down whole sections of the city to create broad boulevards with sidewalks, as you see here, flanked by 5 or 6 story apartment buildings. Sorry. Losing my place here. The apartment buildings were designed in the Beaux-Arts style and lighted by street lamps, as we see here. This opened a whole new world of nighttime leisure activities. Shops, cafes, dance halls, and the opera could now be open at night. The Impressionists celebrated the new Paris, drawn to its color and light, painted with dashes and daubs to suggest the passing crowds and the traffic and the city's shimmering lights. Pissarro was especially fascinated by the different types of artificial light reflected on the wet pavement here. The cool white of the newly installed electric street lamps along the center of the picture contrast with the warm yellow gaslight from the shop windows and the oil burning lamps of the cabs that line the street. The night sky also reflects this light. Another trend in late 19th century painting was tonalism. Given the number of paintings that depict the night sky and emphasize a pervasive tone at Clayton, it's clear that Henry Clay Frick was interested in this theme or interested in artists who worked in this vein. One image is by Fritz Thallo, a Norwegian painter who was fascinated with the night sky, depicting it in both urban and rural scenery, using a loose impressionistic brushstroke. He was Norwegian, so it makes me wonder. I mean, this seems like a fairly well-lit nighttime. We can see the stars, but I wonder if it's because of the northern location that the sky is so bright at night. The other tonalist painter in the collection is Jean-Charles Cazin, who did this in a very striking painting titled The Dipper, with the Big Dipper represented in the night sky and appearing above medieval style buildings that reflect on the water. And we end, of course, with Van Gogh's The Starry Night, which alone I could talk about easily for 20 minutes. The painting presents a view from Van Gogh's iron-barred bedroom window at the asylum where he committed himself after the ear-cutting incident. He took liberties with the view, however, adding a small town which looks more like the Dutch village of his youth than a town in southern France. Some scholars link the prominent steeple to Van Gogh's minister father and Vincent's early career as a lay minister, identifying the forms in the fantastical sky as consistent with Protestant symbolism and with images of the apocalypse. The cedar trees in the view are real. He could see them from his bedroom window, and a frequent motif in Van Gogh's body of work that is a recognized symbol of death, since French and Italian cemeteries were often planted with cedar trees to freshen the air. The flame-like trees draw our eyes from the sleeping village to an amazing cosmology as the moon and stars roll and vibrate in tones of yellow, a color that Van Gogh, borrowing from Japanese color theory, identified with hope. Writing to his brother Theo, hope is in the stars. He also wrote to Theo about existing in another dimension after death. He had identified this dimension, or he associated this dimension with the night sky. The large star right above the horizon is actually probably not a star, but the planet Venus, which was visible from Van Gogh's bedroom in June 1889 when this was painted. Another scholar interpreted the painting from a scientific perspective, suggesting Van Gogh was well-versed in current theories about astronomy. Others have investigated the visual phenomenon that accompany epileptic seizures. Van Gogh was epileptic, interpreting the rings that Van Gogh often depicts around lights as a symptom of epilepsy, of epileptic fits, although Van Gogh was not in one of his periods of breakdown when he painted The Starry Night. Whatever it means, it's one of the most powerful paintings of the night sky ever created, described by viewers as visionary and hallucinatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. It always amazes me how many the parallels and the integration of what we can learn through artwork. So those images were amazing. Thank you. For folks who may have been trying to use the chat feature, we changed a setting, so you should have the opportunity to do that. We have Diane up next, and please feel free to chat any questions either in chat or Q&A, and we'll get to those shortly. Thank you again, Diane, for being here. Diane was with us back in January when we had the first program in the series, along with Steve Quick. And hi, Steve. I'll let you take it away, Diane.
Sorry, I have to unmute first. So I just wanted to say to everybody, thank you for coming. Welcome to International Dark Sky Week. There are over 70 programs that are happening this week around the world. And the International Dark Sky Association has promoted this one too. And I see a few people in the audience that are from, not Pittsburgh, but I know them from being light pollution mitigation supporters. When astronomers talk about light pollution and about getting rid of light pollution, I just wanted to say that it's not that we're trying to make the ground dark. We just care about the sky. So we don't want to light up the sky. The idea is to light smart. So what lighting smart means is just light where you need when you need, and how much you need. So from the very beginning, light pollution was not evident at all. Light pollution is one of the easiest things to get rid of. It's not like water pollution or soil pollution or air pollution. The instant you turn off lights, like the power outage we had in Texas, the instant you turn them off, the sky is just clear. And it's an amazing sight for people who haven't seen this before. The stars are there all the time. The stars are always above the clouds, above the light pollution. You can only just see them when you're in the right location. As soon as I talk about this, people hear about light pollution and changing the way we light the ground so it doesn't bounce up into the sky. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's education. That's the key to this whole thing. So hopefully I'll get a lot of questions afterwards. But when you look up into a night sky like this, a dark night sky, this is the Milky Way galaxy stretching across. That's the edge of our galaxy that we're seeing. You realize that you're not really looking up, you're looking out into infinite space. And that changes your perspective. You feel small, you feel part of something immense. You feel like you're not in the center of things anymore. It's a comforting feeling. It's a spirituality, a calmness, a wonder. For those of us who know the sky, it's a feeling of familiarity and it's soothing. It's a real opposite from the life that we live with artificial light at night, shining in, screens, moving pictures, emails screaming at us to go to work, the harsh lights that keep us from sleeping comfortably. It's the kind of thing that people got used to. And so they don't recognize it. It crept up slowly. And what we need now is a cultural shift. We actually need a new narrative of the dark. Stonehenge was not the only henge monument. The sky was very important to ancient man. This was 5,000 years ago that Stonehenge was built. It was actually built for about 1,500 years. They worked on this. Can you imagine any project nowadays that people would work on that long? It showed phases of the moon. It showed eclipses. It showed as the seasons changed, which stars rose and set at different times of the year. And it showed that people were very focused on the heavens and knew a lot about it. When we ended up changing from hunter-gatherers through herders and on to farmers, the sky became this calendar of our, sorry, I should have stayed there one more second. There we go. I just wanted to say that it was the flooding of the Nile was foreseen in the stars. So the Egyptians had a calendar, and when Sirius would rise in about September, you would know that the first of 3 seasons was starting, Ashket, the flooding of the Nile, and that would go on for weeks and months. The Nile would rise up and flood the banks, depositing really good fresh soil down, and then Perek, the next season was the growing season, then the harvest season. But all of this was depicted in the heavens. So they used the heavens as a calendar. Also, sometimes there were incredible things that happened in the heavens. And since people were watching the heavens, because they didn't have Netflix, right? So they're looking up, what do you see? Supernova happened. So supernova happen in our galaxy every once in a while, but in other galaxies frequently, they're brightening of stars. They're not, nova means new, they're not new stars, they're the death of old stars. So a supernova went off in 1054 AD, and it was absolutely noticed around the world. They can be bright enough to see during the day. This particular one was. And then slowly over time, they fade out. Weeks and months go by, and it peaked and then faded. This one in particular now is the Crab Nebula. This is what we see now in the sky, right? 946 years later, we see the explosion of that star. And these are not colorized. These are the actual colors of the Crab Nebula, which is a radio source. It's got a pulsar in the middle of it, a spinning neutron star. So blue is a neutral oxygen, green is a form of sulfur, red is the doubly ionized oxygen. So you can tell at different temperatures, different things are being ionized, and that's what we see. This is this beautiful photo of that. Everyone watched the sky. From the very beginning to now, people are, it's important. It's a part of life. I mean, you see this repeated over and over and over. So there's, as it is above, so it is below, and everything on land is reflected in the sky. Wherever I go, I travel with my sky and the earth. It's part of our culture, deep culture, that the sky is part of our lives. I just grabbed a few of the many, especially children's books that are out there now that show how throughout time people felt the sky was important. Leave these up here for a second. This is part of the literature. So I tracked back and tried to find some literature that talked about the sky. So this is Charlemagne writing just before he died in 814, he died. So this is him saying, I've heard that in the year 810, there were not one, but two solar eclipses. Find me a scholar to explain this. We tend to have the feeling that people that came before us were somehow not at our level. They weren't inquisitive. They weren't paying attention. They weren't trying to learn. And that's so wrong. The Great Comet of 1577, this is a painting. And this particular comet was instrumental because it led Tycho Brahe to realize that comets were not in our air around the Earth, that they were out in a different realm of space. Here's a wood cutting. This is a meteor shower that actually had 50,000 to 150,000 meteors per hour. We have not seen the like since then. But they wouldn't have seen this either if they had been in Las Vegas. They would have seen one meteor, if that. So in order to see a meteor shower, you need to have dark skies. Curious people put in the chat if they've seen meteor showers. This is 1806. This is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But these are verses that you might not know. Now the traveler in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. He could not see which way to go if you did not twinkle so. You realize that in a dark sight, the Milky Way casts a shadow. It's so bright. And navigating by the stars, you could be a Polynesian wayfinder or anyone who sees the Big Dipper and knows that's north. I mean, sailors navigated by the stars. So we're losing that. I found this in the literature only because Maggie Stiefvater is one of my favorite authors. A book called On the Hawk. At night, we used to see stars. We could see by starlight back then, after the sun went down, hundreds of headlights chained together in the sky, good enough to eat, good enough to write legends about, good enough to launch men at. You know, that's how it was. That's how it used to be. That's not how it is now. I'm not even sure how my astronomy students want to study stars, since some of them can't see stars, depending on where they're living in the world. Beijing, Bangkok. There are many places in the world where you really can't see stars anymore. So I've been talking to authors. I am an author, an editor. So I've been talking to authors for years to try to get them to put things like this in their books. A lot of times I'll read books and people will be in Brooklyn, on the roof in Brooklyn somewhere, looking up at the Milky Way in their fiction. And that really kills me. You can't see it from there, but they haven't looked up. They haven't noticed. People aren't looking up anymore. Dr. Chris Mullen, who lives here in Pittsburgh, you have to savor the stars before you can save them. And in this shot, if you look really closely at the lower left-hand corner, you can see a meteor, a streak going by. It has to be this dark to see faint meteors. So I edited a book. This is 21 stories of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, short fiction and poetry about savoring the stars. And some of them are light pollution stories. So for instance, Peter Pan comes down to Earth. He gathers up the lost boys. He wants to get to the second star to the right and straight on till morning, but light pollution, you can't find the second star to the right. So it's a bunch of creative people, I'll tell you. Some of them are here in Pittsburgh. Mary Soon Lee, who's one of the best poets in the world. Jamie Lackey. So this is what it looks like from space. If you just Google light pollution map, you can come up with this. It's pretty lit up everywhere. Look at Japan. Can't see North Korea. The prediction is that it's just going to get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. I've seen between 2 and 6% per year getting brighter. When I went outside when I was a kid, late 50s, you could just look up anywhere and see the Milky Way. But things creep up slowly and they're not in your pool of worry. You have like a solid pool of worry, and there's lots of things in there, taxes and bills and climate change. But things that are slow and that don't affect you immediately, they get tossed out of that pool of worry. So light scatters in the atmosphere. Some of Joel Tarr's pictures, that moonlight, I've never seen anything like that. That was incredible. But light, if it's not shielded properly, it goes up and then scatters around features like mountains. So you can see it, even though you're around the curve of the earth sometimes. Blue light also scatters more than red light. So all the LEDs that are bluish, like some of these ones in Las Vegas, they scatter more than dim amber colored lights. You can see I think you can see the Luxor beam. It depends on your screen, but if you have a big screen, you can see that one shooting up beam of light going straight up to do nothing except light up the undersides of birds. So this is hundreds of miles away, and this is called sky glow. So Steve Quick, who's in the School of Architecture at CMU, and I are running another class this summer called Sky Glow, a research class for CMU students about taking data and analyzing it and working on the problem of light pollution. LEDs were developed very fast. This is very similar to a slide that Joel showed with candles over on the bottom left, but other types of light got efficient slower. LEDs got efficient really fast, and manufacturers made an amazing amount of them. that they're still trying to sell to people that are too hot and blue, as opposed to the amber colored high pressure sodium vapor that we have. If you've already changed out your lights like Milan, then it's too late because they last for at least 10 years. But what Pittsburgh is trying to do is not be like Singapore here. I know lights are celebration, lights are pretty, lights have their purpose. They show progress, and there's beauty in light. I am not saying that's not the case, but when you light up a city indiscriminately without thinking first about what you're doing, you can have things like the waterfront just being lights in the parking lot all night long, shining everywhere into the river, affecting plants, animals, fish, humans. Billions of dollars are wasted every year in the US. And things like fireflies, the population is down 90% in some places. Granted, it is due to also pesticide use and habitat loss, but light pollution is a big part of that. They can't see their mates so that they can't produce baby fireflies. So all of this together, it's why I've been doing talks around and why I'm trying to reach people. We want to see stars. We want to see the beauty of the night sky. And it is very possible as long as people light smart. Okay, this is Phipps Conservatory, and this is during the Christmas show. They have a glass roof. What can they do? They could shield the roof with retracting awnings, but that's a really difficult proposition. One of the biggest things right now that is producing light pollution are pot greenhouses. And they also have glass roofs and don't shield the roofs, and they are just lighting up the skies all over the place. You can learn more about what we do. Here's a Verge article, Dark Skies Over Pittsburgh. We're trying to work with the city of Pittsburgh to change out 45,000 streetlights in the coming couple of years or so, and shield them, make them dimmable, and make them dark sky compliant. The International Dark Sky Association just put out 2200 Kelvin as the target temperature for lights. So we shall see. We have an International Dark Sky Association chapter here in Pittsburgh. Oh, I forgot to look up what Wednesday in June that was. And here's some of the things that we get. We get notices like this. Peter Fine just wrote us and said, what is this big glowing thing that just appeared 3 weeks ago? And from his window, it like lights up the whole room. And that's what we deal with. The International Dark Sky Association chapter in Pennsylvania and the section here in Pittsburgh, we deal with people and help them understand what the ordinances are and what can be done about things that come up like that new light there. So let us know how we can help you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you again. Thank you so much. I will ask Diane if you could stay on, and you're off mute. So there are a couple of questions that came in that I can let you know about. And I will ask Beth and Joel if you can come back on to join us, and we'll see if any more questions come through. Diane, someone had seen you speak at Allegheny Observatory, and they were asking if there have been any further developments with the 2300 degree Kelvin LED streetlights like the one on the CMU campus near Fruh Street, as well as if you've tried to get Phipps Conservatory involved in combating light pollution as they are with other types of pollution. And I'll just ask then maybe if that can lead into you talking a little bit about the nighttime aerial map of the city of Pittsburgh with those before and after shots of the new LED lights and how they'll save energy and remove some of the dangerous glare and cut down on pollution.
So we are working with the city of Pittsburgh. It's DOMI, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, and they are on board. They have to do the announcement. I shouldn't jump the gun here, but they're very concerned about the issues, and they know what the issues are. Karina Ricks is in charge of this office, and they've been working with us to try to make sure that the facilities and the parks go dark sky compliant first, and then the street lights, and then after that, maybe tackle the ordinances in Pittsburgh. Steve and I are working to get funding for a city map with a helicopter. We tried it with drones. We tried it with airplanes flying low and slow. And we figured that what we really need is a helicopter. It can do it in one night. Fly over the city and get a nighttime map at high resolution before and then after the streetlights are changed. And what this will do is it'll promote Pittsburgh in the world, and it'll give scientists of all kinds a place to come if you're studying fireflies, if you're studying medical issues, if you're studying any aspects of fish populations or whatever it is, trees leaf out too early in the spring or hold on to their leaves too late in the fall. So any of those things, all the scientists can converge on Pittsburgh because we will have the data necessary. So I'm excited about that. I haven't talked to Phipps, but we did when we were working with the Friends of Mellon Park. Phipps is involved with the city there, and they did for the expansion that they're doing there. They're working on keeping the indoor shades shuttered when the lights are on inside, and putting dark sky compliant lights outside.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And a question for Beth, I believe, came in. Was tonalism influenced by the Northern European Baroque artists like Jean van Goyen?
Yeah, actually, a lot of movements a lot of art movements in the 19th century were influenced by Dutch 17th century landscape painting. Dutch painting of the 17th century was widely collected in the 19th century, particularly in America, which saw a lot of parallels between itself as a democratic Republican country and 17th century Holland as a democratic Republican and Protestant country. Both viewed themselves, they view the Dutch as very similar. So Dutch landscape painting like that by Jan van Goyen influenced the Barbizon School, a French movement of the mid-19th century, the Hudson River School, also a movement of the mid-19th century, but in America, painting American landscape, the tonalists of the late 19th century, and a movement called Luminism. It's not really it's not a word they used at the time, but later scholars who focused on artists who really reflected no pun intended, interest in the light. Though actually, I think the biggest influence on tonalism, which is actually a term for the American movement, I applied it to European painters, was Whistler, of Whistler's mother fame. I really wanted to include him. I cut him out at the last minute because I knew I was running long. But Whistler really initiated tonalism by working with very limited palettes. And he wanted art to be as abstract as music, which is why he named his paintings after musical movements. And he painted a series of nocturnes, a term that, again, relates to music, but depicted the night sky.
Great. And a question for all of the panelists, anyone or all of you would like to answer. We have, has the panel noticed any particular shift in modern art and literature directly associated with the lack of dark skies?
That's a really good question. I deliberately cut myself off at 1900, so I didn't go into modern art except for one painting I kept running across by Georgia O'Keeffe of the night sky, which is really beautiful. I don't know, that's something I'd have to look into, whether or not contemporary artists, we have so many contemporary artists that are interested in sustainability and other issues around the environment. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know if any off the top of my head.
Tyler Nordgren, who's the one, he's an astronomer, but he does half the park is after dark. He does the all the national parks, and he paints the beautiful sky seen from the parks. But I don't know of anybody who's painting light pollution into their modern art. And literature, I just see more wrong things than right things at this point. Good question, Gracie.
And another question that came in for you, Diane, you said that 2200 kelvins is the target color temperature for street lights, but do you know if these lights will be LED? Do you know if the lamps will have lower lumens or be better shielded, or is this simply replacing bulbs? Will this help with visibility from the observatory at all?
Right now, the city has only agreed for less than 3000 Kelvin. The 2200 just came out this year, the recommendation for 2200. And it really is going to be a balanced cost because these are newer lights. We do have to change the entire head because we don't own any of the wooden poles. Those are Duquesne Lights poles. So we rent the poles, but we will change the light on top. And they will be individually controlled. So you can, if there's an incident in the area, you could brighten them up from the ambulance or whatever. So they're dimmable and shielded, and we'll have a sense of how well they're outputting. So a lot of times when you put in a light, it starts out really bright and then a decade goes by and it's almost nothing. So we'll be able to see that from the control room, like what each individual light is going to do. We're working on trying to see what people think. We put some new lights up on Fruh Street. It costs like $100 to get the city to put up one of our test lights. So we do have a 700, I think we have a 2200 light up there just to see what it looks like. We're working on it, I guess, is the best I can say about that right now.
And are LEED points assigned for responsible use of lighting?
You know, Steve Quick's the one who would know the answer to that, and I think he's here, but I don't know if he can type in the
believe he
chat.
was, and if it maybe, okay, we'll keep an eye on that. If he's still on and he wants to answer, well, I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not.
In the meantime, Joel, has the replacement of smoke pollution improved our ability to view the stars, or only replaced atmospheric pollution with light pollution?
Well, I think I actually had suggested that, and that, that basically the smoke is, it is more historical perspective in terms of the increase in illumination and street lighting. And what's driving that in many cases is a belief that the streets will be safer if they're more lit. And there's a lot of political action in that direction, but also the belief that a modern progressive city is a well-lit that. So you find an awful lot of writing about the way in which lighting was so critical, illumination was so critical in advancing modernism, you see. So you really, there's big forces there driving towards increasing artificial light, you know, because of what is seen as positive features of it, and making it somewhat difficult in many cases to reduce the amount of light pollution.
And we had, you were breaking up just a bit there. Someone was asking also, were there any considerations of light pollution at the time street lights were first installed?
Well, I don't, I haven't seen anything about it. It's interesting that every time there's an innovation of some sort, from whale oil to manufactured gas, to gasoline lamps, to electricity, there's always a complaint about the previous stage of development, how limited it was and how inadequate it was, and how important it was to progress on to the newest stage of lighting that was available. And again, you cannot downplay the belief that safety is very closely related to lighting. And that a lot of the arguments for spending money is that we need lighting in order to protect the streets, make them safer.
And I'm not sure if Steve is with us.
Yes, I'm
Yes,
here. Katie.
okay, good. This is working. I'll let you take that last question.
Could you just repeat that for me, Tato?
Yes. They are asking, are lead points assigned for responsible use of lighting?
Yes, they're just starting to do that. There is a light pollution category. It doesn't give a lot of points, but actually we have a building that's coming before the city for approval, and they're not taking advantage of that. And so I'm trying to push that they will comply with that, not only for the building, but also for the urban open space that surrounds the building. So it's going to take a while. We're going to see lighting ordinances change eventually. We're going to see certificate programs such as LEED and others begin to see that this is not healthy in the long run. And there are a lot of other factors that Diane started to get into that are what we might call deleterious with too much lighting or the wrong kind of lighting. And I think as science gets better at this, we will become better at our nighttime lighting. And I agree with Joel, there is a safety issue. And it's a delicate balance between how much light you need to really see well and how much light, when you have too much, it's actually unsafe because it creates too much of a contrast between the lit area and the dark areas, and you cannot see beyond the light itself.
Thank you. It's nice to have a special guest on as well.
Steve could actually answer two more questions that are in there. Steve, don't go away. I don't know if he can see them though.
No, I can't, Diane, if you could.
The first one is, as new developments, office buildings, apartment buildings are being built in the city, can the zoning commission set guidelines for light output?
Yes, we can. There is a lighting ordinance that's in part of the zoning code, the city code, and we can control light. Where the city's starting, though, is with all of the public realm, the air and the items that the city owns. We'll start there, and eventually private property will become more involved. But yes, we can begin to set limits on lighting. And a lot of cities around this country actually do not let any light pass beyond the property line of properties. And and some of them enforce that very strongly, particularly in wealthy suburban areas who value their privacy. But I think we'll see more of this as time goes on.
Can I add a point there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Last night I had dinner. My wife and I had dinner with friends, a retired a physician from the University of Pittsburgh, and he began talking about the landscape. He lives up Center Avenue, overlooking the University of Pittsburgh campus. But in order to get to his place, you have to pass that huge building at the corner of Craig Street and Center Avenue, which creates almost a kind, you thought a lot of the building going on in Bakery Square area, buildings that were right up at the property line and blocking out light and making it obviously difficult to see the sky. So the zoning ordinance is maybe a weak tool to depend upon in order to get some of these things changed. Because we're building artificial canyons that block out the light and the air and the stars, you know, it imposes a very big burden. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know we're running long on time. Someone had asked, what are 3 things that we can do to help with the dark skies? So maybe we can end with a few tips. We're hoping to continually offer suggestions and tips through our programming at the Frick and on our website. So maybe you could each leave us with something.
Light smart means just light what you need, where you need, when you need it. So turn off your lights when you don't need them. Put shades so that your lights from inside aren't spilling outside. Use dimmers, timers, motion sensors. Just be aware of how you're spreading your light around. And I think as individuals, that makes sense. But if also you own a big building, then, you know, follow the International Dark Sky Association guidelines. I know there was a question about art. Did you see that one from Bianca
Yes.
Labrador?
Did the night sky appear in Eastern art before it appeared in Western art?
You're getting out of going outside my wheelhouse here with questions about Asian art. I know that Chinese astronomy was developed very early on. I've seen very early, though I don't have specific dates, illustrations that are primarily prints made by the Chinese that address the constellations. So, well, not the way we would define constellations, but the way they would. So, but I'm not sure about painting. I'd have to look into that as well. I know Japanese printmaking, which really flourished in the 18th and 19th century, often addressed demons and dreams. So it's likely there are depictions of the night sky there.
Okay. And because I'm so thankful that you've all stuck with us, I have to just throw in this one last question that came through. Since the city is a relatively small geographic area of the county and beyond, 58 square miles if we count the rivers versus 745 miles square, what efforts are underway to take a more regional approach? Diane, you're on mute. I see you sort of.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm running a meeting in Busan, South Korea in 2022 with the International Astronomical Union. So I'm not only working locally in Pittsburgh, but worldwide, trying to prevent and protect the skies above observatories mainly. It's all one effort. It's all together a single effort. You know, I love Pittsburgh and I want us to shine. That's probably the wrong word to use in this context. You know, I want us to stand out in the world for being the city that did it right. So I'm focused here, but I'm also working with people all over the world.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you to our panelists, Diane, Beth, and Joel, for bringing so much light to us for tonight, the good light. Thank you, Amanda and Lizzie, for your support. Gratitude to our Frick Society's donors and our Frick members. We greatly appreciate your support. To anyone finding us for the first time, we welcome you back anytime. And be sure for everyone, please check out the many International Dark Sky Week programs going on. It runs through April 12th, and you can find more information online at idsw.darksky.org. We at the Frick look forward to continuing to inspire and delight everyone through our programming under both day and night skies, outside and indoors, just as soon as it's safe to do so. So please continue to visit our website for updates at thefrickpittsburgh.org. Be well, everyone. Thank you again, and may your stars be many. Thank you, Steve Quick, for that.
Thank you, Cato and Amanda. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
That's wonderful. I very much appreciate this
Thank
opportunity.
you so much.
Take care.
It was very enjoyable to listen to my colleagues up there making the presentations. I learned a lot.